Okay. Well, welcome everyone to Drugstore Culture's vodcast number 13, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Jamie Susskind as our guest, primarily because of the excellent book he's written, Future Politics, seen here, but also because he's interesting across a range of subjects. It's also, before we get on to the book, Jamie, I mean, you are a practicing barrister.
I am.
And just before we went on air, you mentioned you'd been in court for 3 days.
Yes.
So how do you combine the life of a busy book-selling author with the life of someone with a practice at the bar?
Not very well, is there? It's at great detriment to my health and my social life.
But being a barrister involves long hours of preparation, and
yes.
It's Rumpole of the Bailey is not true. I mean, a lot of it, as I understand it, not being a barrister, but it's just hard slog and preparation.
Absolutely, 99% of cases are won before you
Yes.
get to the courtroom. I love it as a job because it keeps me in touch with the real world. I'm an employment lawyer, so
Right.
I get to peek inside the workplaces of this country up and down.
Do you see yourself as a litigator, or are you?
Well, yeah. I mean, as a barrister, it's all I do. I'm
Right.
right at the sharp end. I'm only really involved when something is about to get to court and when it
Right.
does get to court. So you see relationships at their very worst. It's a bit like being a divorce lawyer, being an employment lawyer. It's not that similar to the book, although my study and interest in law definitely informs the way I think about politics and the way I think about technology as well. Because those three topics, law, politics, and tech, I think are inseparable.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think the obvious question to ask is how you came to write the book, because I was fortunate enough to be sent quite an early copy of it, and I read quite a lot of books on digital issues and particularly their connection to society and politics and so on. It was immediately apparent to me this was an important book, and I'm fascinated to hear more about how what spawned it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to confess that the actual writing of this book took place away from my day job, because I tried for a couple of years to be doing it at nights and weekends, but I just couldn't.
Yeah.
And so, but having laid the groundwork for a couple of years, I was lucky enough to get this fellowship at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society in Harvard.
Brilliant.
And I took myself away there, and for nearly 12 months, I had nothing to do. Well, I was still doing some legal work, but I basically had nothing to do but write this book. And I kept myself deliberately jet-lagged, so I woke up every morning at 4:35 and worked flat out until about 1 in the afternoon, 2 in the afternoon. In the later stages, I was trying to do 1,000 words a day. And then I spent a lot of time afterwards refining my ideas. But the good thing about being in Harvard was that I'm not from a scientific or technical background, so I took my own study of these technologies as far as it could go, but then I could go and see one of the world leading experts on machine
she's on
learning.
the doorstep, yeah.
Exactly, and check that everything that I
But
was...
what had actually inspired that's the execution of the idea.
Yes.
What had inspired the idea? What had made you think that a book like this, which is very ambitious in its scale and successfully so, but why do you kind of come to think that this would be worth a year of your time?
Well, it had been germinating since I was a student of politics, and I graduated in 2010 with a degree in politics. And what struck me what struck me as remarkable then, even in 2010, was that I could graduate from a good university with a degree in politics without once, if I didn't wish to, referring to the internet. And that struck me as strange, and it struck me as strange that when we reach for ideas and names to talk about the future of politics, we're not reaching for political theorists from the 20th or 21st century. We tend to reach for novelists of the early 20th century, your Orwells and Huxleys and Welleses. And that struck me as a quite big gap in our philosophy, in our learning, that we simply don't have the words or the vocabulary and the ideas to describe the world that we're building.
I mean, one of the obvious examples which springs to mind is that great debates about the propriety of the 2016 referendum, but the law that governs the referendum and indeed elections and so on was framed in 2000, which was 4 years before Facebook and 4 or 5 years before broadband became generally used. So,
yeah.
And I think this is one of the interesting things which you deal with very successfully in the book is this very at the moment tense relationship between technology and politics and government and law. Mm-hmm. Do you want to? Can you sort of expand on that a bit?
Well, the basic thesis is that our technologies are changing much faster than our politics, certainly faster than our laws, and in many cases faster than our morals as well. So we are creating our new world, and I can talk a little bit about the technologies if you wish that I'm interested in, but we're creating a new world and we don't yet have the political and legal systems to govern it, let alone really a way of enabling us to speak about it. We're condemned to describe the future in terms of the past, which is why people always, look at a big tech firm like Google or Facebook and say, oh, it's a state or it's a utility. But in a sense, it's neither of those things, obviously. Just because Google has power doesn't mean that it has a monopoly of violence within a territory. And just because it's used by large amounts of the population doesn't make it similar to the water company or the electricity company. Those companies never change the way you perceive the world like Facebook or Google does. And so that's an example of an area of politics and technology that we simply don't have the words to describe. What is a tech firm? Because I say, the big thesis of the book is those who control the most powerful technologies in the future will increasingly control the rest of us. And that is the big political challenge that will face our generation and face us in the 21st century. And we don't even have the words to describe what the new entities are that are primarily coming up with and owning and controlling these technologies.
Is there a growing jurisprudence around tech, or is it fairly thin?
There is a growing jurisprudence, but I'm biased. I mean, the truth is that, if you look in the footnotes and the index to this book, you'll see that I draw on a lot of excellent learning. But academia doesn't reward broad-based attempts to see the wood for the trees.
Yes.
And so a lot
it's
of the
twig-based.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's piecemeal. It's a particular technology. It's a particular application of a technology. It's a particular election, or it's a particular legal concept. Whereas my view is if you're going to have a fundamental change in the way that we organize each other and organize the way we live together, and I believe that's what we're going through. It could be as fundamental as the invention of writing.
Yeah.
You need a wholesale reassessment of the way we speak and think about law and politics, and that's what I've tried to do in the book. I
think it's fair to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you're not one of the kind of the ultra dystopians, are you? You're not one of the people who've written about tech in the last couple of years and sort of fallen for it's the end of days. The seventh seal is being taken off and we're all doomed. I mean, is that fair?
It is fair. And I think that those dystopian writers tend to fall into two categories. One is the group that looks too far in the future. They look to the world where, artificial intelligences are so powerful that they, as it were, keep us as pets.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking mode of discussion. I'm more interested in the world before we get to that stage, which I think is quite a long way off. The second group of dystopians, I think, are people who are determinists in the sense that they see a particular set of social forms as inevitably arising out of technology. Whereas the whole point of my book is that we still have everything to play for. I don't yet think we are playing for it, so I think that we're letting the values and the norms of Silicon Valley transform the way we live together in quite an unthinking way.
I mean, when I first read your book, one of the names that just sprung to mind immediately was Karl Popper, with, and his thesis that the whole point of science is that it makes the future of history unpredictable.
Yes.
And which I think breathes through your book, which is that it's absolutely ridiculous to try and plot a linear gradient in all this.
Exactly.
That human agency is very important.
Exactly. And what I say is that there's a lot of work to be done if we're to avoid a future in which the negative aspects of technology outweigh the positive, to put it very simplistically. But that work can be done, and it must be done.
How can we, though? Because, if you look at, I think Damien Collins's review into fake news has been impressive, but if you look at the Senate hearings where Zuckerberg appeared, they were pitiful.
Yes.
So what are the mechanisms in terms of policies, Western democracies, that are going to bring about that change? Or are they actually to be found within traditional political forms?
Well, I think we're going to have to rely on traditional political forms, at least for the time being.
Because they're all we have,
and I will answer your question about regulation and laws. I don't want to dodge that. But before we get there, it's clear that what we need, first of all, are what Tim Berners-Lee calls philosophical engineers. That is to say, we need to train our software engineers and expect more of our tech companies to, in terms of recognizing the social and moral implications of their work and we're currently nowhere with that. At the same time, we need to demand of our politicians that they understand technology, and I can't put it any higher than that. You know, saying I don't understand the internet should be as unthinkable as a politician saying they don't understand economics or they don't understand the English language. It shouldn't be.
Well, I appeared before the Select Committee inquiry on fake news, and one of the MPs asked me what an app was.
Yeah, I mean, how we can call for the regulation of technology by regulators and legislators who don't know what an app is, or as Senator Orrin Hatch asked Mark Zuckerberg, how does Facebook make its money if it doesn't charge its users? I mean, okay, maybe not everyone knows the answer to that question, but if you're seriously thinking about regulating these
systems,
you ought to understand. Because in the event, what will happen, particularly in the USA, is that the tech firms themselves will write the laws and present them to Congress, and they'll say, yes, this looks very good, stamp. And if it's anything like the financial sector, 10 years later, you'll realize that actually it wasn't geared towards the interests of consumers or citizens. So in the first place, I think we need a generation of politicians who get it. Don't need to be scientists or engineers themselves, but they do need to understand what big data is, what artificial intelligence is looking like, the trends in the ubiquitous computing, the trends in blockchain and the like. And at the same time, we need engineers who are more conscious of the work that they do. And I can give some examples of that if you like. And then we get to a world, eventually, I hope, where we start thinking about regulation. And I would hope that a lot of the need for regulation is obviated by tech firms taking more responsibility, becoming more transparent. But
what are the forces, though, that will make tech firms do that?
That's a good question. And so it's clear that basic economic forces are inadequate.
Yeah.
Because you and I might choose not to use Facebook because we object to it, but there's still 2.2 billion other members.
Yes.
And so Facebook doesn't care about that.
I mean, everyone says they don't like surveillance and they don't like bots and they don't like this until you say, well, do you like Deliveroo and Uber and Amazon? They say, well, I like that very much. You know, it's
exactly.
The convenience that's been offered by tech is so enormous that actually the public will to do much about it is, I think, actually quite slight.
Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, you know, a lot of what I talk about in the book is the future.
Yes.
And I'm not one of those people, again, who says that Facebook is controlling your lives. It's not. But it could. Because if you look at the speed and extent of the technological transformation that's taking place within Facebook, which, by the way, far outstrips anything in any university or government laboratory, then in 10 or 15 years' time, the situation will be rather different.
What are the I mean, for those who haven't read the book, what are the sort of primary risks, do you think?
Well, perhaps at this stage it might be worth just saying what I see as happening in technology.
Yeah.
There are three. The first is increasingly capable systems. So processing power continues to grow at an exponential rate, such that in a couple of years' time, the average desktop computer-sized piece of tech will have the same processing power as the whole of humanity. There are already artificial intelligence systems that can beat us at every game. They can do things that you'd be surprised by, like lip reading or mimicking human speech or telling the difference between a real smile and a fake smile better than the best humans.
Like Hal in 2001, they can lip read.
Well, exactly. And machine learning systems are now much better than humans at that.
Yes.
Even the best human experts. They're better at reading our emotions than most of us are as well. You know, there are systems that can, in the future, in the not too distant future, your iPhone will be able, through its, if it wishes, through its face recognition technology, through the same camera, to tell how you're feeling.
Yes. And
that's something that, you know, we don't necessarily have insight into when we look at each other. We're not that good at reading those things. They can detect cancers, skin cancers, lung cancers, better than the best human doctors. They can predict the outcome of litigation better than some of the best appellate lawyers in the world. I'm not someone who claims that we're near artificial general intelligence, so systems with consciousness and creativity, but we are creating multitudes of narrow systems which can perform tasks which we previously thought only humans could do, and they can do them better than us.
Yeah.
So that's trend number one. Trend number two is technology is becoming increasingly integrated. We're used to tech being a separate thing that you can see and identify, or what's called the glass slab of your iPhone. Before that, it was the keyboard and the mouse and the screen, and before that, a computer was the size of a room. In the future, it's said technology is going to be much more integrated into the world around us.
This is the Internet of Things.
Exactly,
Yes.
into our object and our artifacts, into smart cities, so in our public spaces, dense with sensors and connected to the internet, inside our bodies in the form of nanotech, on our bodies in the form of wearables, in our homes, in our appliances. And what it basically means is that not only are systems becoming more capable, but they're increasingly everywhere. And the distinction between online and offline and real and virtual...
becomes meaningless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might be able to tell, but the distinction won't actually matter. Whereas even just... I mean, it's amazing to think we only had smartphones since 2009, but, I remember growing up using MSN Messenger on our computer at home. You were very clearly online at some point and online
And offline, yeah.
And I just don't think my children will understand that distinction. And the third is...
The good question to ask a teen is, would you prefer there not to be hot water or Wi-Fi? And believe me, it's a non-question.
It's astonishing.
I mean, the idea of there not being Wi-Fi is so scandalous.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what the last generation of people are who can't remember a time before the internet. I think it's probably mid-90s, people born in the mid-90s. And that, in a sense, gives us, before I get very briefly onto the third trend, it gives us a sense of how quickly this is all happening.
Well, that seems to me absolutely the heart of it, which is that not only is the scale of this bigger than anything, possibly since the invention of writing, but the pace is phenomenal.
It's unbelievable. We generate, and this is the third trend, we generate more data every 2 hours than humans did from the dawn of time until 2003. Every 2 hours, and it's growing exponentially. Almost all of our lives and what we do, or an increasing amount of them, are gathered and caught as data and recorded in permanent, semi-permanent form. The truth is that, and this is what frustrates me a lot of the time when people come back to me and they say, well, Facebook's over, none of my friends use Facebook anymore. Or, but you still can't, your iPhone still crashes from time to time. And anyone can point at an individual piece of technology, or indeed an individual tech company, and say the lifespan of that is finite. The days are numbered. But if you try to step back and look at the grand scheme of things, systems are growing more capable, they're becoming more integrated, and the data we're generating is vastly greater than it ever was before. And whatever form it will take, whatever will be the next Facebook or Google or Twitter, in a sense is secondary to the point that these broader trends are quite obviously taking place in front of us.
Yes.
And people use the uncertainty of the future and the fact that there's no evidence from the future as a kind of excuse for not planning for the future, which seems to me to be madness. I may turn out to be wrong in terms of my predictions, both in the specific sense and I think less likely in the general sense, but the idea that you wouldn't plan for it just because you can't be certain about it is illogical.
What do you think has been the impact of this technology upon our politics, and what might it be in the medium term?
So, I think it's been transformative already.
Yes.
I think where to start. So I think it's given a lot of power to certain groups in society, and by that I mean real power to get us to do things we wouldn't otherwise have done. So increasingly the people who write the code and the devices that we use control our lives, which is why when you get in your self-driving car, it might not go over the speed limit, it might refuse to park on a double yellow line. Those decisions are taken out of your hands, they're put in the hands of the people who write the code. And increasingly we live our lives through technology, and so we rely on those people to write good code. Our behavior changes when we're being watched. People are able to influence and manipulate us. Said that Cambridge Analytica had 5,000 data points about 200 million Americans in the Trump election, and that's revolutionized the way that we're persuaded. As has the fact that we increasingly rely on technology to control our perception of the world. We rely on tech to gather and filter the news that's beyond our immediate perception and feed it back to us. And which slice of reality we're presented with is extremely important because it determines what we think is true or false or right or wrong. So I already think it's important in that way. We increasingly rely on technology to do things which relate to social justice, which we would previously have only thought were questions for the market and for the state. So whether you get a job is increasingly determined by algorithms. 72% of CVs are never seen by human eyes. Whether you get insurance and on what terms, whether it's health insurance or something else, a mortgage, a loan, how long your prison sentence is. These are all things which we increasingly trust.
So bye-bye to the veil of ignorance and rules, basically. I mean, it doesn't really have much meaning anymore, does it?
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's a sort of new veil of ignorance, which is the fact that we're all ignorant to what's going on inside these algorithms.
Yes.
There's a sort of black box. A lot of the time, it's both a commercial black box in the sense that we're literally not shown how.
Is that actually the key pressure point? Which is that the algorithms that you refer to are, in a sense, now the dominant determinant of what happens, and yet they are as untransparent as any such determinant has ever been in human history. I mean, you really cannot get at them.
Yes, it's an absolutely critical point, and Jack Dorsey recently went before Congress. He's the head of Twitter, to tell them that the Twitter algorithm had inadvertently downgraded about 600,000 people from the public consciousness. That included politicians,
yes,
who were running for re-election at the time. And he, who's a well-meaning guy, turned up before Congress and said, "But don't worry, I've voluntarily chosen to come here and tell you about it." And it seems to me that it can't be that the first time we hear about that is when
I've
the
come
CEO,
to tell you I am Pharaoh.
Exactly, decides out of the goodness of his heart to let us know that there's an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff rather than a fence at the top. And so I think that we need to, and the big theme of the book, if tech firms are taking responsibility now, are taking on the burden of functions, democratic or to do with social justice or to do with freedom, that were previously the province of politicians, they have to accept the responsibilities that come with that. And so I think we will need to demand a degree of transparency, a degree of accountability, and perhaps even break them up in the future to make sure that none acquires too much power.
And does that necessarily involve supranational action? Presumably it has to, doesn't it?
In the long term, yes, but again, I think that's too often used as an excuse for inaction.
Not to do anything.
I mean, look what we have in Europe. We have the GDPR,
Yep.
which is an imperfect piece of legislation, but it gives us way more data protection than our American friends.
Yep.
If you use Twitter in Germany, you won't see a swastika because the government there said that symbol is illegal here. Twitter, make it stop, and they did.
Yeah.
If you go to California, or in the Californian senator, I should say, in the U.S. Congress, Dianne Feinstein is introducing legislation related to bots online, so they have to a certain extent, identify themselves and who's funding and paying for them. And if that passes, Americans will be better protected against that than we are. The truth is that the ultimate regulation of artificial intelligence will be a matter for global attention, and it would be great if we could somehow harmonize the norms. But we have to accept that the world we're living in is moving away from that. And there's an enormous amount we can do on this island and on this continent that can better protect us.
Do you think it has, I mean, writing this book, and then obviously there's that wonderful phrase of Ian McEwan's when you're promoting a book that you become an employee of your former self, right? So, but I think it's only part of the truth, that because what happens, I think, when you're promoting a book is you think about it afresh.
Yeah.
Has this book and its success made you think about what all this is doing to what it means to be a human being?
Wow. Well,
or might mean.
I've certainly thought about what it's doing to me as a human being. Reducing the amount of sleep I get.
Yes, sleep deprivation.
Yeah. Long flights to
Yes.
address bookstores with 10 or 15 people
Yes.
in them.
It's always one or the other, isn't it? It's 10 or 15 or a large group.
Exactly. Sometimes on the same day.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It kind of cancels itself out in terms of your ego. I
mean, for example, privacy.
Yeah.
Which, I'm a bit older than you. And privacy was, I grew up in an area
where it was a thing.
Where privacy was still a thing. People talked about privacy as not just something that was desirable, but there was a kind of almost a right.
Yeah.
Now privacy is something that I question whether people actually value it as much as they used to.
Absolutely. I think my generation, on a number of levels, is prepared to see trade-offs. For instance, just this morning I sent a tweet of a poster that I'd seen on the Underground. It was a very simple poster on behalf of a health insurance company, and what it was saying was, if you use your Apple Watch to detect how many steps you take every day, we will lower your insurance premiums in response to that. And that, to me, is part of a much broader trend where companies will offer our service in exchange for increased visibility of our lives. And a lot of the young people, I actually wasn't judging that one way or the other. I was just saying this is interesting.
This is happening, yeah.
A lot of young people replied saying, great, I'm going to get cheaper health insurance.
Yes.
I live a very active life. Likewise, a lot of people in my generation and younger are much more keen to promote themselves on social media.
Sure.
They're much more keen to subject themselves to rating systems like we use when we use Uber, because we as passengers are rated
Of course,
as well as drivers.
That's the contract.
Exactly. And so I think people recognize that it is a two-way street. And we also recognize, if we think about it, that what we get in exchange for our data, the data that we give to Google when we type our deepest insecurities into its search engine, or the data that we give to Facebook when we post our most intimate family photos, in commercial terms we get quite a good deal.
Yes.
We get these remarkable platforms. Google is an astonishingly life-enhancing thing, and the idea that you could take back your data but instead pay for it is not a deal that I think most people would accept. So I think that my generation is realistic about the trade-offs, the commercial, the social trade-offs with privacy. One of the things I think we're insufficiently attentive to, though, is the political implications of it. Because when you really allow data about yourself to be gathered in vast amounts, then it does give people a particular kind of power over you, which I think we haven't yet begun to appreciate.
Do you think that technology at the moment, as presently constituted, is necessarily heading towards kind of oligarchical arrangement?
Yes, because network effects mean that even if you and I started a social network tomorrow that was superior in functionality and design to Facebook in every way, it would still be worthless because it was just me and you who were members of it to begin with. Similarly, what makes Google a great search engine is the fact that 60,000 people use it a second, and they can use those results to refine and hone their algorithm. The best that tech startups these days hope for is to be bought by the big companies.
Yes.
Do I think that's economically necessary as a pattern for the future? No, I don't. I mean, I think that these are, to a certain extent, market failures, and even from a conservative or an economically liberal perspective, you could identify them as such. It's not just a left-wing thing to say that they've become too powerful. But certainly the trend is towards oligarchy, and particularly the oligarchy of those who own the most important technologies.
Well, it's Peter Thiel's famous point that you can have liberty or democracy, but you can't have both.
Peter Thiel,
which seems
that great political theorist.
And guess which side he comes down on.
Yes.
And I've always thought that's the paradox of all this, because I'm when I first became interested in this, there was a kind of blissed out neo-1960s utopianism around technology, especially around Web 2.0, which was that we all thought that borders would melt, pluralism would prosper, the world would come together, and we should all link hands and sing. And I'm only slightly exaggerating, actually. I remember going to Google conferences at that period, and there was a kind of extreme utopianism going on, which was hubristic, to say the least. Now, that's obviously not true, but we've now gone the other way, I think, which is to be very frightened of the dark side of all this. What are the upsides? What can we look forward to from this technology that's going to improve and enhance the quality of life?
Yes. I mean, what I would say about the internet as example is what's so helpful about it is that what it shows incontrovertibly, to my mind, is that technologies are shaped by the social and political systems that they are born into.
Yes.
People thought that because the internet had a decentralized network structure, that we would become a decentralized network society.
Yes.
But in fact, the internet was born into a society of democratic capitalism, and so inevitably, it now seems in retrospect, it came under the control of governments and very powerful private entities. Yeah. And in retrospect, that doesn't seem that hard to understand. But at the time, as you say, it wasn't foremost in people's minds. There's a lot. Inevitably in interviews I end up talking about the dark side too much, because the book, I hope, does explore some of the ways that technology can make us...
It does. It's not a...
live richer and more connected.
It's not a pessimistic book, I think.
No. Well, it's a call to action is what it is.
Yes, exactly. It's call to
It's a call to... It says that if we don't do something, then there might well be bad consequences.
Of course.
But I make no apologies for that. I mean, even in my lifetime, technology has made our lives infinitely more dignified in some ways, exciting and open and variable. The idea that I can ask a machine a question in natural language now, and it might answer it in a way that's satisfactory to me, is something that I don't think it's shallow. I think fascinating. I think previous generations of human beings not so long ago would have seen it as godlike.
I mean, I met an oncologist the other day who's decided to describe himself as an algorithmist because the protocols that he's designing to combat tumours are so phenomenally bespoke and complicated and computer generated that he thinks that calling himself an oncologist is now meaningless.
Yeah.
And I took to be a good news story, because here was someone who was using the power of the new technologies for an indisputably good thing. And it was an unusual example of the word algorithm being used in a beneficent way.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we're surrounded by algorithms, and if self-driving cars come to pass, which I think they will, I think those will be a remarkable piece of technology, freeing up hours in the day that you might spend driving to do other stuff, productive stuff, allowing people to use the roads to whom they were previously closed, persons who are unable to drive for whatever reason. The idea that you won't necessarily have to own a car, but you could, because we only use our cars a fraction of the time, that you might share it with the people on your street, or you might share a fleet in a particular municipality. I hope technology will make us healthier. I hope it will make us safer. I hope it will make us more aware of other cultures that are not our own, and of other exciting opportunities in the great big world that's out there, and could lead us to broaden our minds and live much richer lives than our parents and grandparents did. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I'm excited about a lot of it. I also think that so many of our current systems are so imperfect. I think our democratic system is so imperfect. I think our system of government is so imperfect. Our healthcare system is so imperfect. The way we distribute resources in society is so imperfect. And if tech can help us improve on that, then great, it'll be part of the march of human progress.
Final question. I wanted to sort of end with the way I started, which was, has writing this book and talking about it impacted upon your attitude to being a practicing barrister and your relationship with the law? Do you see it differently?
I mean, I didn't start off as an academic lawyer, and what I've noticed is that in my profession, where those who studied academic law, who did an undergraduate degree and then maybe a master's degree, as barristers often do, have a kind of reverence for law and for legal systems, that those who, like me, did a different degree and then did a sort of slapdash conversion course and really learned the law on the job. We often have different perspectives. I mean, I think that the law is an extraordinary creation of human beings, and I'm geekily fascinated with the way that it works and the way that it functions. And it's definitely changed my perspective, in the sense that I think that increasingly those who write the rules are not the same as those who write the laws.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily something that could be taken for granted 100 years ago, or certainly not 500 years ago. To return to the self-driving car example, the limit at which you drive will not be determined by you as the driver, and to a certain extent it won't be determined by the law either. If for insurance reasons the coders decide that car will not go over 45 miles an hour, that decision has been taken out of your hands.
Yes.
You can't dodge a bus fare if your smart wallet automatically deducts the fare. You can't stream an episode of Game of Thrones online if the digital rights management technology is too powerful. You can't pay someone cash in hand in a cashless economy. So technology increasingly rewrites the rules in a way that I think legislators could only have dreamed of.
Yes.
And coders refine the rules in the ways that lawyers would, I think, find very attractive. So I see a lot of, and this isn't an original insight by me, this is something that's been said since the earliest days of cyberspace. There's a lot of similarities between code and law. But we're about to enter an age, I think, in which code assumes greater importance than it ever has.
It almost is. It sounds to me like you're describing almost a cyber version of common law as well, that a kind of virtual common law emerges.
But here's the problem, Matt, and I argue this in the book. The common law develops over hundreds of years. It develops in the open, and it develops consistently in a given area. So if Judge 1 has made a rule, Judge 2... exactly. Whereas the way that code develops is ad hoc. Facebook and Twitter might take a different approach. It's in secret in the black boxes we described earlier. And with respect to tech companies, it's developed often without great reverence for decisions and principles which humans have learned often the hard way over hundreds and hundreds of years. So the way in which code develops is not as well equipped for success as the way in which the common law develops. That's why the analogy is both helpful and scary, I think.
Yes. Brilliant. Well, I can't recommend this book highly enough, Future Politics by Jamie Susskind, and thank you, Jamie, for coming in.
Thanks, Matt.
It's a great book, and I wish you well with it.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot.